essentially for life. You're disqualified for the rest of your lives. You are not allowed to be around children. You cannot, you can't go to 4-H clubs anymore and do astronomy classes. You can't go, you can't do astronomy with children for the Minnesota Astronomical Society. You could no longer be invited as a guest into elementary schools in Minneapolis, which I had done dozens of times, and teach astronomy to the children in public schools. He said, "You're done, and I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to hear how good you were. I don't want to talk to you." And what he said was, "I'm a child protection officer. I am a child protection officer, and you don't bother me." And last week, the day after Marian died, I was telling everybody about it, and I included him in the list. I didn't say anything special to him. I included him in the list, and I said that Marian had died of a broken heart, and that she couldn't sleep at night, that she thought about how the children had been kicked out of our daycare with no warning, these 1- and 2-year-old children, and how the next time these children saw us, they buried their faces in their parents' shoulders, and they ran up to their parents and buried their faces in their parents' legs, and they didn't know why we had rejected them. They didn't know why we had kicked them out of our daycare home. They didn't know why Marian and Michael suddenly hated them and were being mean to them. And the children thought it was their fault that they were out of our daycare home. The little ones, they were just really remorseful, and Marian couldn't take it. And I said, and she couldn't stand it, and she died. And I said this to this guy, and he wrote back to me. He said, "Do you even know who you're writing to? Take my name off of your mailing list. I'm a child protection officer. You have no business writing to me. You have no business telling me about your daycare home. It's just too bad, and leave me alone. I am a child protection officer of Hennepin County." And his attitude was just vicious and scathing. Such a bitter. I'm really glad that, Marian, I shouldn't say I'm glad. I'm not glad about any of this. I'm not happy about any of it in the least. I'm sad that that person has so much power, and that he could do these things and destroy people's lives. I'm sad that during the second trial, which you have to have 2 trials, one for the suspension and then another for the revocation. At the second trial, he was the only person that the judge listened to. We had a professor of medicine come and speak on our behalf, and a professor of pediatric psychology. We had lots and lots of daycare parents there. All of the daycare parents, except for, of course, the child that I left, that I forgot in my van, who was in the van for 80 minutes. He was fine. He was completely undamaged, but it was horrible for him. The daycare parents all wanted the daycare to stay open. They all disagreed with the disqualification. At the first hearing, at the end of the day, there was still a whole bunch of parents waiting outside the hearing room who wanted to talk. And Hennepin County specified, they said, "We understand that this was a very good daycare home. We understand that they have a tremendous amount of support. If we don't have to come back here tomorrow and continue for another day of testimony, we will specify for the record, officially for the record, that this was a really good daycare home, and that it was an excellent place for children, in the opinion of all of these parents." They didn't agree to that themselves, but they said, "We understand that that's why this large group of parents is here, and we understand why this group of pediatricians and child psychologists and child development experts and professors and lawyers and cooks and bicycle shop managers all want to keep their children in this daycare home. We understand that's how they feel about it. And that same woman, 6 months later, who specified to all that, 6 months later wrote that we were dangerous people, that we were egregiously dangerous, that we weren't dangerous by accident, but we were dangerous because we were innately careless, that it wasn't an accident. The state of Minnesota, not just the Hennepin County attorney, but the state of Minnesota officially and publicly wrote that it was not an accident that the child was left in the van, that that was the way that we do things here at Turner and Kauper Daycare. You know, and it killed her. And I don't sleep at night. I think about it every night. 4 or 5 months ago, I heard Marian talking to an old friend from high school, and I overheard her, and she didn't know that I was hearing what she was saying. You know, I had been working on the computer, and I had the TV going. I turned off the TV, and I heard her on the phone. And she said, you know, we're going to be okay somehow. Michael is going to fix this. He's very tenacious, and we have a lot of people on our side. But Michael will keep working at this until the people at DHS understand that we loved our daycare home and we loved our daycare children. And I know what I have to say. I am not very good at expressing myself, especially in writing. And I had mentioned many times in support of the idea that the child did not actually need medical care after what I had done. He was only in the car for 80 minutes, and he was very, very frightened and very upset, and really, really horrible, horrible experience of being left completely alone, but not in need of medical care. According to the official magazine, the family pediatricians, the Journal of Family Pediatricians, and according to Mayo Clinic, and according to this professor from the professor of public health, who we had all coming and testifying at our trial, when a child has mild to moderate heat stroke or heat prostration, that if they start recovering immediately, they don't need medical care. They don't need to go to a doctor. They're gonna, if you just give them sips of water and take off the jacket or get them out of the car or stop the soccer, pull them out of the soccer game, that they do need medical care. And specifically, according to the American College of Emergency Physicians, they should not have an IV. They should not have any treatment beyond water and rest. And of course, when they brought them over to the emergency room, the emergency providers didn't want to be neglectful, and so they did give him an IV. But the American College of Emergency Physicians said that they shouldn't. And what I said that's been either deliberately, either willfully or through an honest misunderstanding, what I said that has been misinterpreted was that after we had him out of the car for half an hour, they talked on our front porch with me and for half an hour, and we gave him sips of water. I did a skin test, what's called a turgidity test for dehydration, where you pinch their skin and it immediately goes back to being flat if they're not dehydrated, or it sits up in a roll if they are dehydrated. I did a skin test on his arm and on the back of his hand, and he wasn't dehydrated. And I tried to get the parents to come into the house and so we could take his temperature. I said, I've got a really good digital thermometer. Of course, being us, the one most top rated by Consumer Reports, is most accurate. And I said, he would come in the house, take his temperature, give him some more water, sit down for a while. And they said, no, we want to leave. And after half an hour, he was starting to smile and starting to talk. And he was still like, I mean, it was really bad for me to do this. It was, I made mistakes with children, scolded them when I didn't mean to, or yelled when they were about to hit another child and scared the child because I yelled. And this was 1,000 times the worst thing that I've ever done. And I don't want to minimize it. Minimizing it would be so unfair. It would be really creepy. I'm not that person. I didn't minimize it from the very beginning, and I never minimized it. But they asked him, do you want to go down to the park? Do you want to go to soccer practice? And the little boy said, yeah, I want to go to soccer. And so they took him to soccer practice. And obviously, the reason that they took him to soccer practice was because he was feeling really bad. They wanted to take him to soccer practice because they wanted to help him to feel better again. This was a very good thing. I thought it showed that they were very sensible parents. When you're a parent and you love your child, when your child gets hurt, you want to get them stabilized and back on their feet. And what I maintained in writing, I never got to say this in court because we were never told until after it was all over that the critical issue in the disqualification was whether or not the child had needed medical care. Our lawyer didn't tell us this. The Hennepin County agents didn't tell us this. The prosecuting attorney didn't tell us this. The papers that they sent to us accusing us of willful child endangerment and willful egregious neglect, basically deliberate neglect. None of these papers said that the critical thing under Minnesota law, that the technicality was that it was serious child abuse because he needed to go to a doctor. And what I said was, I was okay. I was a little unhappy that the parents took him down there because I wanted to take care of him. I felt horrible. I wanted to take his temperature and give him more water. But I completely sympathized with what the parents were doing. It didn't hurt the child in any way to take him down to the park. And the thing that I would like to say to you, the watcher right now, and to all of the parents and to the Department of Human Services was that they saw that their child was getting better. They saw him with a weak smile and talking to them and wanting to go to the park. And I kissed his forehead. They wouldn't do the thermometer, so I kissed his forehead, and his temperature was normal. He seemed a little bit warm when we pulled him out of the car the first time I kissed his forehead, but the second time, after a half an hour had gone by, I kissed his forehead again, and he was either normal or a tiny bit warm. And I'm an expert at kissing kids' foreheads and finding out if they've got a fever, because sometimes the electronic thermometers go wonky. And I have many times been the last authority in whether or not a child has had a fever. And I said, nope, I don't care what the thermometer says. He still has a fever. You've got to come and pick him up. And the next day we'd get a call and they'd say, yep, his fever was 103. He had strep throat. So he didn't have a fever by the time he left. And I guess my final point would be that he was recovering, and he was on his way to recovery. It was slow, and I felt guilty, and his parents felt disappointed and scared and resentful, and I felt ashamed of myself. But I knew he was going to be fine. When I was a lifeguard, I had lots of people pass through my hands that I, got them water, got them, literally got them sponging themselves off with a cold towel. And I knew he was going to be fine. He was totally recovering. And that, according to the Mayo Clinic, is a clear indication. Mayo Clinic specifically says, I can quote it, they say, if they begin to recover in less than an hour, they do not need medical care. And he started recovering within 5 minutes, and a half an hour later, he was well on his way to recovery. Technically speaking, he did not need medical care. If I had been his parent, I very likely would have brought him in for medical care. I mean, when he got down to the park, he was still wobbly. He couldn't really participate with the other children. He was still wobbly. And so his parents took him to be checked out. Of course they did. But what matters under the law is that he didn't need the medical care. He wasn't injured so badly that he needed medical care. According to the American College of Emergency Physicians, according to the professor of professor of neonatal care, and according to Michael, who has seen hundreds of cases of mild heat exhaustion with our daycare children running around and playing soccer and staying out in the backyard and zooming around at the beach. And you know, I've sat hundreds of children down and said, here's some water, here's a cold washcloth, you're going to be fine. No, you can't go right back outside. You have to have a half-hour rest before you go back outside. Were you wearing your hat? I want you to wear your hat. I'm sure that we drove all the kids crazy, insisting on that they play in the shade or wear a hat when they were outside, and we carried water outside to them all the time. I mean, I knew that the little boy was okay. Even though it was horrible, I knew he was okay. And that, under the law, you might think of it as a loophole. People who are watching this might think it's a really good thing that our horrible daycare was closed. But under Minnesota law, there was no grounds for the daycare to be closed. And that's what the Department of Human Services wrote several times and made very, very public, was that I was blaming the parents, that this child was, according to me, injured because of them. It wasn't because of them. He was injured. Technically, medically speaking, he had mild injuries, very, very mild, which went away right away. His first cousin told me, Michael, you shouldn't be feeling so guilty about this. We saw him running around down at the park. He's just fine. You know, the very next morning, he was running around down at the park. You didn't hurt him. And that means that they had no right to do the disqualification. It means that it was a mistake. And our daycare should have been open. We should have been allowed to close it ourselves in a timely and proper fashion. Those toddlers shouldn't have been tortured by having people that they loved and cared about ripped away from them. Just like that. Oh, and that person who said, that Hennepin County person, the one who closed those daycare homes for the elliptical trainer, you should know that same quality assurance specialist 5 years before had been in our daycare home. She was training in a new young licensing worker, and she came into our daycare home and she saw two 10-year-old girls who had gotten out the mats that we used for gymnastics and wrestling. Our daycare home almost always had a professional coming in to teach the kids karate or Aikido. One time it was Greek, another time it was Spanish, French. Weirdly, we had a teacher who taught the children how to play poker because it was a good way to learn math. And they were practicing American collegiate wrestling with the formal rules. And the quality assurance specialist for Hennepin County, top licensing worker in the county, comes in and she says, "What are you doing? That's dirty. What are you girls doing? You shouldn't be touching each other like that. That's dirty. You come over here. You stop that." And so this person who had no right to even talk to our children was way outside of the law, assaulted our daycare children, told them that they were dirty. And this is the same person who has convinced all the other licensing workers at Hennepin County and the director of licensing that when children build a blanket fort, the child care provider is guilty of felony sexual abuse by neglect because she let the children build a blanket fort. Or if the daycare provider has a play tent, or if she lets the kids have an appliance box from a refrigerator or a dishwasher when she gets a new washing machine, if she lets the kids play in the box, that it doesn't matter if nothing happens between the children are out of their sight, out of the provider's sight. And that means that even if the provider is monitoring them and she does what we did, which was cut big holes in the sides of the appliance boxes, that is child sexual abuse through neglect. This same person who screamed at our children. And, one of the reasons that she hated us was because we maintained all along. There was an incident in 2006 where 3 8-year-old boys looked at each other's penises. And we did not punish the children for doing that. Hennepin County, she wanted to close us. We weren't closed. We got a correction order. Nobody closed our daycare home or even tried to close it, but we got a correction order saying that we had been neglecting the children. We fought it and we won. And she wrote a letter saying that we should have been closed. And even though we hadn't broken the law and that we were well within the daycare rule 100% of the time, that she felt that our daycare was dangerous and we should have been closed. And she really did not, it really chafed that we had refused to punish the children. What we had told the children, and because it became such a big deal, we made it public how we handled it. We said, you can't do this at daycare. Your privates are your privates. You're not supposed to be showing them to other children. You can talk to your parents about it. You can ask your children. When you peek at each other like that, it's normal. It's not dirty. We know that kids are curious about sex, but you must not ever do that at daycare. It could get us into a lot of trouble. When kids do that, there are people who would like to close the daycare home. And that's all we did to the children. We told them the truth. We told them that it was socially unacceptable and that it made some people very, very upset, but that we were not upset with them. Their parents were not upset with them. They weren't naughty children. It wasn't dirty. There was nothing, they did nothing wrong, but they absolutely couldn't do it at daycare. And we had a family meeting about it. We told all of the kids why that couldn't happen at daycare. And she felt we were terribly dangerous people. She screamed at Audrey and Sophie when she saw them wrestling. And she wrote, she supported the disqualification, and she wrote in this public paper that we should never have been allowed, that we should have been closed 10 years before, because we were very bad people who, I assure you, very much disagree with her approach to children and children's sexuality. And it broke Marian's health. And I have a pacemaker now. I have high blood pressure. I have heart failure. And I didn't have any